The massive lecture hall of the Galactic Institute was alive with excitement. Students from dozens of different worlds had gathered for the most anticipated event of the academic year, the annual Predator Showcase. This wasn't just any ordinary science fair. This was where each species brought their most terrifying hunters, their deadliest killers. Their apex predators that ruled their homeworlds with fear and violence. The hall itself was enormous. It's designed to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and shapes. Near the front, towering Krathari students stood almost 20 feet tall, their razor-sharp claws clicking nervously as they adjusted their displays. These fearsome warriors came from a world where only the strongest survived, and their natural weapons could slice through solid steel like paper. Their exhibit contained a creature that looked like a cross between a tiger and a nightmare, with teeth longer than human fingers and eyes that glowed with predatory hunger to their left. The crystalline Vexti beings floated gracefully above the ground, their transparent bodies refracting the hall's light into beautiful rainbows. But don't let their beauty fool you. These creatures were manipulating gravity itself around their exhibits, making rocks float and twist in impossible patterns. Their predator was something that defied physics, a creature that could walk on walls, ceilings, and even upside down in midair by controlling the very forces that kept planets in orbit. Hulking Gorvani warriors occupied another section, their natural armor plates gleaming under the station's bright lights. These beings looked like they were born for war, with muscles that could crush stone and reflexes faster than lightning. Their contribution to the showcase was a beast from their brutal homeworld's fighting pits, something that had never lost a battle and had killed over 100 opponents in ritual combat. The excitement in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Students whispered to each other in dozens of different languages, placing bets on which predator would be declared the most impressive. Professors from various departments wandered between the displays, taking notes and preparing their evaluation criteria. This wasn't just about showing off the winning species would receive significant funding for their biological research programs and bragging rights that would last for years. Into this atmosphere of controlled chaos walked Dr. Jake Mitchell, the lone human exchange student. He was completely unremarkable compared to the giants surrounding him. Average height, brown hair, wearing a simple lab coat that had seen better days. He quietly pushed a small cart containing what looked like the most pathetic display in the entire hall. While other species had brought massive containment units with reinforced walls and warning signs, Jake's contribution was embarrassingly simple. Just a basic glass terrarium, the kind you might find in a child's bedroom for keeping pet hamsters. It was so small and plain that several students didn't even notice it as he wheeled it past their elaborate exhibits. Inside this humble container sat what appeared to be absolutely nothing threatening whatsoever. A tiny brown spider, no bigger than a child's fingernail, sat motionless on a small piece of bark. It wasn't doing anything impressive. It wasn't glowing or breathing fire or demonstrating supernatural powers. It was just sitting there, looking like something you might accidentally step on while walking through a garden. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Vorthok, a 12-foot Gorvani warrior whose natural armor plates made him look like a walking tank, was the first to notice. His deep voice rumbled across the hall like distant thunder as he pointed at Jake's pathetic display. "Is that seriously it?" he boomed, his words dripping with disbelief and contempt. "That tiny, worthless thing is what Earth considers a predator. That pathetic creature is humanity's contribution to our showcase." The laughter started small, but quickly grew into a roar that filled the entire hall. Students from every corner pointed at the human's display and doubled over with mirth. Some were laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. Others were wiping tears from their eyes, or whatever passed for eyes in their species. Even the professors seemed embarrassed for the human. Professor Zilton, a respected Vexti academic whose research had shaped galactic understanding of predator biology for decades, actually winced as he looked at Jake's modest setup. The poor professor clearly felt sorry for the human student, who had obviously misunderstood the assignment so completely. "Humans," snorted a Krathri student, his voice sharp with derision. "It's no wonder their pathetic little planet is still unvisited by any civilized species. If that's the best predator they can produce, it's amazing they haven't all been eaten by their own house pets. But Jake didn't seem bothered by the mockery echoing around him. He simply smiled a quiet, confident smile and began calmly setting up his equipment, completely ignoring the waves of laughter and pointing that surrounded him on all sides. The presentations began in earnest, and with each new display, the mockery directed at the human grew more intense. The alien students seemed determined to show just how pathetic Earth's contribution really was by comparison. Vorthok stepped forward. First, his massive frame casting a shadow over half the audience. With obvious pride, he activated his species exhibit. The containment field shimmered, and suddenly a creature materialized that made everyone in the hall take a step backward. The Void Stalker was like nothing most had ever seen, a predator that existed partially in normal space and partially in some other dimension entirely. As the audience watched in fascinated horror, the Void Stalker began hunting holographic prey that had been programmed to simulate various galactic species. The creature would simply walk through solid walls like they didn't exist, appearing behind its target without warning. When it struck, its claws passed through armor, shields, even energy barriers, as if they were made of air. Nothing could stop it. Nothing could hide from it, and nothing could escape it once it decided to hunt. "Behold," Vorthok announced proudly, "the apex predator of our homeworld. It has never failed to kill its target. It cannot be stopped by any known defense. This is what a real predator looks like." The crowd erupted in appreciative roars and applause. Several professors took detailed notes, clearly impressed by the creature's impossible abilities. Next came the Krathari delegation. Their representative, a towering female warrior with scars covering her natural armor, released what she called the Razorhawks. These weren't birds in any sense that humans would understand. They were living weapons that moved through the air like liquid metal given wings. The demonstration was terrifying in its efficiency. The Razorhawks were given a section of decommissioned starship hull to practice on the same ultra-strong materials that protected vessels traveling between stars. The creatures didn't just cut through it. They sliced it into perfectly symmetrical pieces so quickly that the metal didn't even have time to heat up from the cutting process. "Our Razorhawks can penetrate any armor ever created," the Krathari announced with fierce pride. "They've brought down entire fleets by cutting through ship hulls like soft fruit. Even our own warriors fear them." Crystalline Vexti students floated forward next, their display somehow even more unsettling than the previous two. Their predator wasn't just deadly, it was wrong in a way that hurt to look at. The creature existed in multiple time streams simultaneously, moving backward and forward through seconds like a fish swimming through water as they watched. The time predator would strike at prey that hadn't even entered the arena yet, killing creatures that were still several seconds in the future. Then it would fade backward through time to attack the same prey from a different angle in the past. The effect was nauseating and completely impossible to defend against. Time itself bends. "Around our hunter," one of the crystalline beings explained, their voice harmonizing with itself as they spoke across multiple temporal dimensions. "How do you fight something that has already killed you before you knew you were in danger?" Each presentation was more impressive and terrifying than the last. Species after species unveiled predators that defied logic, physics, and sanity. There were creatures that fed on fear itself, beasts that could survive in the vacuum of space, hunters that could track prey across multiple dimensions. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of increasingly elaborate and deadly demonstrations, it was Jake's turn. The human walked to the center of the hall, still pushing his pathetic little terrarium. While thousands of alien eyes focused on him with barely contained amusement, he cleared his throat and spoke in the same calm, quiet voice he'd maintained. Throughout all the mockery, this is a common jumping spider from North America. Scientific name Phidippus audex. Weight approximately 0.1 grams. Body length 13 millimeters. It primarily hunts insects and small arthropods. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter exploded like a bomb going off. It wasn't. It's just loud, it was physically painful. Students were literally falling over, clutching their sides, their various appendages, their breathing apparatus, whatever they used to express overwhelming mirth. Some of the Krathri were laughing so hard. Their razor-sharp claws were leaving gouges in the floor. The Vextai were giggling in harmonics that made the station's hull vibrate. Even the normally stoic Gorvani warriors were slapping each other on their armored backs and roaring with amusement. 0.1 grams, howled one student. My breakfast. This morning weighed more than that. 13 millimeters, gasped another. I've seen dust particles more threatening. But Vorthok wasn't laughing anymore. The massive Gorvani warrior's pride had been building pressure like a reactor about to explode throughout the entire presentation ceremony, being forced to share. The same stage, the same prestigious showcase, with this insulting joke of a predator, was more than his warrior's honor could bear. His roar cut through the laughter like a sword through silk. This is an insult to our traditions. It's an insult to every warrior, every hunter, every predator that has ever lived. How dare you mock us with this pathetic display? The hall fell completely silent. When Vorthok spoke in that tone, smart beings listened. I formally challenge any Earth predator to single combat with our greatest warrior, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of ancient ritual and binding law. Let us end this embarrassment once and for all. Formal challenges were rare in academic settings. They were ancient, binding, and taken very seriously by all galactic civilizations. Once issued and accepted, there was no backing down. Jake nodded, calmly, as if he'd been expecting this exact moment. Challenge accepted. I only request that the combat take place under Earth standard gravity and atmospheric conditions. Vorthok's laugh was cruel and confident. Granted, though it won't matter. This will be over in seconds. The news of the formal challenge spread through the Galactic Institute like wildfire. Within hours, every student, professor, and staff member on the station knew about the upcoming combat between Earth's pathetic spider and the mighty Gorvani warrior. The betting pools were already heavily favored toward the alien champion, with odds reaching astronomical numbers against the tiny Earth creature. The arena preparation was a massive undertaking. Engineering teams worked around the clock to construct a perfect combat environment. They built a circular chamber 50 meters across, roughly the size of a football field, with reinforced walls, capable of containing even the most violent encounters. The floor was carefully designed to mimic a forest environment, complete with scattered rocks, fallen logs, patches of moss, and even small trees that had been transported from various worlds to create realistic terrain. Atmospheric processors hummed constantly, maintaining Earth-standard air pressure and gravity. Temperature controls kept the environment at exactly the conditions the human had requested. Lighting systems replicated the soft, natural illumination of an Earth forest, filtering artificial sunlight through holographic leaves that cast moving shadows across the arena floor. Surrounding the combat space, massive viewing screens rose, like stadium walls, ensuring that every spectator would have a perfect view of the action. Hundreds of alien students crowded into the observation decks, their excited chatter filling the air in dozens of different languages. Many had brought recording devices to capture what they expected would be the most one-sided fight in galactic history while the arena was being prepared. Jake stood before the assembled crowd to provide what he called an educational briefing about his spider. Most of the audience had gathered expecting some kind of dramatic pre-fight ceremony, but instead they got what seemed like the most boring science lecture imaginable. Jake spoke in the same calm, measured tone he'd used throughout all the mockery. He talked about something called hydraulic leg systems, explaining how his spider's legs worked like tiny hydraulic pumps that could generate incredible force relative to the creature's size. He mentioned trajectory calculations, describing how jumping spiders could perform complex mathematical equations in their tiny brains to calculate perfect landing spots. The alien students barely paid attention. They were too busy placing bets, sharing jokes and speculating about how quickly their champion would end this embarrassing charade. The technical terms Jake used, things like persistence hunting and ambush predation, meant absolutely nothing to beings whose worlds had never experienced the brutal evolutionary pressure that shaped life on Earth. To these alien civilizations, predators were obvious things. They were big, loud, frightening creatures with massive claws, energy weapons, or reality-bending powers. The idea that a truly effective predator might be small, quiet, and patient was completely foreign to their understanding of how nature worked. Jake also mentioned something about Earth being what scientists called a high-pressure evolutionary environment. But this concept sailed right over the heads of students whose homeworlds were relatively peaceful places where the most dangerous creatures were about as threatening as house cats. Then Thakmer entered the arena, and the crowd's attention immediately shifted away from Jake's lecture to focus on the real star of the show. Thakmer was everything you'd expect from a Gorvani champion. Standing 12 feet tall and weighing nearly half a ton, he was a walking mountain of muscle and natural armor. His skin was covered in thick, overlapping plates that looked like they could stop laser fire. His arms were as thick as tree trunks, ending in hands that could crush steel. His legs were like pillars, designed to carry his massive frame across any terrain without difficulty. But it was his reputation that truly made him legendary. Thakmer was the undefeated champion of the Gorvani Military Academy, a warrior who had never lost a single combat in over 200 battles. He had fought creatures from dozens of worlds and emerged victorious every time. His name was spoken with respect and fear throughout Gorvani space as he walked into the arena. His natural thermal vision immediately activated, scanning the environment for any sign of his opponent. The technology built into his eyes could detect heat signatures so faint that he could track the body warmth of creatures hiding behind solid walls. Spotting one tiny spider should be laughably easy. The moment Jake released his spider into the arena, Thakmer's thermal vision locked onto the minuscule heat signature. The creature barely registered as a warm spot, so small and cool that his sensors almost classified it as background noise rather than a living being. "I almost feel guilty about this," Thakmer rumbled, his deep voice carrying clearly through the arena's audio systems. The massive warrior began moving toward what he assumed would be the easiest victory of his entire career. This is less a battle than an execution. He raised one enormous foot, preparing to simply step on the spider and end this. It's a ridiculous spectacle, before it could become any more embarrassing for everyone involved. But the spider moved in one fluid motion that seemed to defy physics. Tiny creature launched itself through the air with startling precision. It didn't just jump randomly, it landed exactly where it clearly intended to land, 15 feet away from Thakmar's descending foot, positioning itself behind a small rock that provided perfect cover. Thakmar paused, momentarily surprised. He'd expected the spider to freeze in terror or scurry around mindlessly like most small creatures did when faced with overwhelming danger. Instead, it had moved with what almost looked like tactical intelligence. "Cute," the warrior laughed, the sound echoing through the arena like rolling thunder. "The little thing wants to play a game. Very well, I'll indulge it for a few more seconds." The watching students erupted in cheers and applause, certain they were about to witness the shortest combat in Institute history. Several were already preparing victory celebrations for their champion. None of them realized they were actually watching the opening moves of a hunt, and the spider was the hunter. What the hundreds of alien spectators packed into the observation decks didn't understand was that they had completely misidentified what they were watching. This wasn't a fight between a mighty warrior and helpless prey. This wasn't going to be a quick execution followed by celebration. They were witnessing something far more sophisticated and terrifying. They were watching a hunt in progress. And the tiny earth creature was the predator. The spider began moving with a purpose that was immediately obvious to anyone who understood what real hunting looked like. Every step, every leap, every moment of stillness was calculated and deliberate. The creature treated the carefully constructed arena like a three-dimensional chessboard, using every rock, fallen branch, patch of moss, and shadow as strategic elements in a complex game that only it fully understood. When Thakmer made his first serious attempt to catch his opponent, lunging forward with the speed and power that had made him legendary throughout Gorvani space, the spider was already gone. Not just gone, it had moved to exactly the right position, at exactly the right moment. Having calculated the warrior's movement arc with mathematical precision that left even the Institute's advanced computers struggling to keep up with the calculations involved, the massive warrior's confidence began to crack as the first minute passed. Then the second, then the third, without him managing to land even a single blow. Every attack he attempted seemed to hit empty air. Every time he thought he had cornered his tiny opponent, the spider had somehow anticipated his strategy and moved to counter it perfectly. This wasn't the random, it's a panicked scurrying that Thekmer expected from a small creature facing overwhelming odds. The spider moved with the deliberate, calculated purpose of a master strategist who was always thinking several moves ahead. It seemed to read the warrior's intentions before he had fully formed them himself, positioning itself just out of reach with an almost supernatural ability to predict his actions. "What's happening down there?" whispered a Krathri student, her natural predator instincts finally recognizing that something was very wrong with what they were watching. "Why can't Thakmer catch it?" Other students began murmuring similar concerns. As they watched their champion start to breathe heavily from his efforts, the mighty Gorvani warrior, who could fight for hours without showing any signs of fatigue, was already beginning to sweat from the constant movement required to chase his impossibly elusive opponent. Jake spoke quietly from the observation deck, his voice calm and educational as always, but now carrying an undertone that made several nearby aliens lean in to listen more carefully. "It's learning," he explained, as if he were discussing a fascinating laboratory experiment rather than a combat that was supposed to result in his spider's immediate death. Right now, systematically mapping his reflexes, timing his reactions, identifying his blind spots. Every movement Thakamor makes is providing data that the spider's brain is processing and storing for later use. The alien students' cheers and laughter began to die away as the implications of what Jake was saying started to sink in. It assumed they were watching a brief, amusing spectacle before their champion claimed easy victory. Instead, they were realizing that their supposedly invincible warrior was being systematically studied and analyzed by a creature smaller than his smallest claw. Down in the arena, Spider continued its methodical work. Escape or hide, it was conducting a detailed reconnaissance mission, gathering intelligence about its opponent with the patience and precision of a trained military scout. Every time Thekmer attacked, the spider gathered a little more information about his speed, his reach, his reaction time, his preferred attack patterns. The warrior's movements became increasingly erratic as his frustration mounted. He began making tactical mistakes, overextending himself in his eagerness to end this embarrassing chase. His attacks became more predictable as his anger overcame his training. With each passing minute, he was giving the spider more and more valuable data about his capabilities and limitations. "This is impossible," growled a Gorvani observer, his own warrior pride wounded by watching their greatest champion struggle. "Against such a tiny opponent, how can something so small move so precisely? How does it know where Thakmer is going to attack before he attacks?" Jake's explanation was matter-of-fact, delivered with the tone of a professor teaching a basic concept to confused students. Earth spiders have been perfecting these hunting techniques for over 400 million years. Every generation that survived passed their knowledge down to the next. What you're seeing isn't luck or instinct, it's the result of evolutionary pressure that your worlds have never experienced. The spider continued its deadly dance, never staying in one place for more than a few seconds, never moving in predictable patterns, never giving Thakmer any opportunity to adapt to its strategy. It was treating the massive warrior like a research subject, studying him with scientific thoroughness, while staying just beyond his reach. As the minutes stretched on, something unprecedented began happening in the observation decks. The alien students, who had come expecting to witness a massacre, found themselves watching their supposedly invincible champion being outmaneuvered by an opponent they had dismissed as pathetic. The laughter and cheering gradually gave way to uncomfortable silence. The tension in the arena had reached a breaking point. Everything 10 minutes had passed since about predators and hunting, and not a single alien in the observation decks was laughing by a creature that weighed less than a paperclip. The atmosphere had shifted from excited anticipation hunt was just beginning. Uncomfortable confusion. And the spider was in complete something control. Approaching genuine concern. Thakmer, the legendary undefeated champion, was now visibly exhausted from chasing an opponent that seemed to exist in a completely different reality than the rest of them. Jake's voice cut through the worried murmurs of the crowd, calm and educational, as always, but now carrying a weight that made everyone listen with complete attention. "You're witnessing 4 billion years of evolutionary pressure in action," he explained, his tone suggesting he was discussing a fascinating natural phenomenon rather than a combat that's defying everything these aliens thought they understood. About predators and prey? Earth is what scientists classify as a death world. Every square meter of our planet contains dozens of species actively trying to kill each other. Survival isn't just difficult, it's a constant battle against impossible odds. As he spoke, the spider was making its way up a fallen branch with deliberate, measured movements. Each step was placed with the same mathematical precision that had characterized its entire performance. The tiny creature climbed steadily upward until it reached a position directly above where Thakmer was standing, breathing heavily and scanning the ground for his impossibly elusive opponent. This spider's ancestors didn't just survive in that environment, Jay continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent quality. They thrived in it. Every generation that lived to reproduce passed their hunting knowledge down to the next. What you're seeing isn't instinct or luck. It's the accumulated wisdom of millions of generations of perfect predators. Refined and polished by the most brutal selection pressure in the known galaxy, down in the arena, Thakmer was reaching the limits of his endurance. The mighty warrior who could battle for hours without showing fatigue was now panting heavily, his natural armor plates slick with perspiration. Sweat ran down his face as he continued searching for an opponent that seemed to have vanished completely from his thermal vision. The warrior's movements had become increasingly desperate, unpredictable as his frustration mounted. His tactical training was being overwhelmed by anger and exhaustion. He spun in circles, slashing at empty air. His enhanced senses, unable to locate the tiny heat signature that had been taunting him for what felt like an eternity. "Where are you?" Thakmer roared, his voice echoing through the arena with a mixture of rage and something that might have been the first hint of actual fear. "Stop hiding and fight me like a warrior." But the spider wasn't hiding, it was positioned, exactly where it needed to be, directly above its target, waiting for the perfect moment with the infinite patience that only comes from millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The alien students watched in stunned silence as their champion stood directly below the branch, completely unaware of the danger position just a few feet above his head. His thermal vision was focused on the ground level, scanning rocks and logs for any sign of movement. It never occurred to him to look up. The spider moved with a grace and precision that defied physics as understood by most galactic civilizations. In one fluid motion that had been perfected across countless generations, the tiny predator released its grip on the branch and dropped silently through the air like a guided missile made of living tissue and evolutionary perfection. Take, single quotes more. Never saw it coming. His enhanced reflexes, his battle-tested instincts, his legendary awareness, none of it mattered. Against an opponent that had spent millions of years learning to be invisible until the moment of attack, the spider landed with surgical precision. On the one tiny gap in the warrior's neck armor, a space barely wider than a pencil, where the overlapping plates separated just enough to expose vulnerable skin. Without hesitation, it delivered a single, calculated bite that injected exactly the right amount of venom needed to incapacitate its target without causing permanent damage. Thak, single quotes more, the undefeated champion of the Gorvani Military Academy, the warrior who had never lost a battle in over 200 fights, collapsed to the arena floor within 3 seconds. His massive frame hit the ground with a thunderous crash that echoed through the suddenly silent observation decks. Medical teams rushed into the arena immediately, their emergency equipment already prepared for this possibility, as they worked to stabilize the fallen warrior. Their instruments confirmed what everyone could see. Thakmar was alive and would recover completely. The spider's venom was designed to incapacitate, not kill. It was a precision instrument of warfare, not a weapon of mass destruction. The lecture hall fell into a silence, so complete that you could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. Hundreds of alien students who had come expecting to witness a massacre found themselves staring at a scene that challenged everything they thought they knew about strength, power, and what it meant to be a predator. Jake quietly began packing up his simple terrarium, moving with the same calm efficiency he had displayed throughout the entire event. As he prepared to leave, he offered one final observation that would haunt the alien students for years to come. "For what it's worth," he said, addressing the stunned audience with the tone of someone sharing an interesting but not particularly important scientific fact, "I specifically chose this spider because it's one of our more docile species. Most Earth predators don't show such restraint when dealing with threats." As he wheeled his modest display toward the exit, passing between showcases of creatures that could manipulate time and phase through matter, every alien in the hall finally understood a truth that had eluded galactic civilization for centuries. They understood why no species had ever attempted to invade the small blue planet called Earth, why humanity's homeworld remained unvisited by conquest fleets, and why the galaxy's greatest military minds spoke of Earth only in whispers. They had just witnessed what happened when 4 billion years of evolutionary warfare was condensed into 13 millimeters of living perfection. And they would never underestimate the death world again.